is the AggLayer live? The answer is yes. The AggLayer is live in its first iteration. So the release of the AggLayer is going to come in multiple different phases, and each phase is obviously going to be better than the last and kind of have more features than the previous version. These L2s don't have a token, so we're going to get an airdrop if we kind of farm interactions on these L2s. I think that's maybe an unspoken truth of a lot of the TVL. I think in general, like right now, ZK rollups are more expensive than optimistic rollups just because of the kind of computation that needs to happen. It is like technically live, like you can swap and migrate from MATIC to POL, but there's no real reason to do so. So there's no point doing it. The reason that it's exciting for me is because we kind of have like a lot of like the maxis of Ethereum are obviously staking in Ethereum. And then with that, it almost limits people's participation in new innovations that from creator perspective or like a founder perspective, it's like, well, how do I get these people interested? How do I get these people involved? And how do I get them to participate in this thing that I'm creating?
Hello à tous l'équipe, j'espère que vous allez bien. Aujourd'hui, on se retrouve pour une nouvelle interview. Une interview, je pense, qui va beaucoup vous plaire puisqu'on se retrouve directement avec Jarrod Watts, qui est en relation avec les développeurs à Polygon. Donc lui, il s'occupe de s'occuper de la communauté des développeurs, de leur communiquer toutes les informations. Et du coup, de ce fait-là, il a vraiment une très bonne connaissance du projet, de ce qui se passe et de ce qui va arriver tout simplement sur Polygon. Donc je me suis dit que ça pouvait être très intéressant. Avant de commencer, n'hésitez pas à mettre un petit like, à vous abonner si ce n'est pas déjà fait. Et on commence tout de suite. Hello, Jarrod. How is it going?
Hey, yeah. Hey, Leo. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I'm doing well.
First time in front of the French-speaking audience?
Yeah. I think I know about one French word, so probably
what
not
can
going
you
to be
say
too
in
helpful on
French?
that front. Obviously, bonjour, hello. Doesn't get much better than that. Yeah, baguette. Sure. No, I still haven't made it across to Europe yet. Hopefully, sometime this year. So, yeah, I'll get a bit more cultured.
Perfect. I just wanted to thank you for accepting this interview. So as mentioned, like just before, I do feel that the Polygon project is very interesting. You're building something that is very valuable for the community, especially with Polygon 2.0, which I'm very excited about, especially when it comes to like the liquidity, which is kind of siloed now. And I do believe that Polygon is working to unify the liquidity and make sure all the interactions between the layer ones and layer twos are working, I would say, better than now, because so far the UX and liquidity hasn't been very good with all this modularity approach, I would say. So before talking about Polygon, I just wanted to let you present yourself, introduce yourself, and speak about what you've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you having me on here as well. So my background is from a software engineering kind of background, where I was just working as like a full-time software engineer here in Sydney for a couple of years, doing like application development, and then moving into data engineering for a couple of years as well. I did a little bit of freelancing that got me into Web3. So just kind of tested the waters of playing around with NFTs and tokens and marketplaces and stuff. And then at the same time, I was kind of making videos explaining how I was kind of working on these different projects that I was making on the side, and just making like little educational tutorials of how to make code projects, essentially, like websites and different experiments that I was just kind of having fun with. And then after I finished that freelancing gig, I ended up saying to myself, hey, these two things that I have, like Web3 and making videos and making content, is kind of where I want my career to head. And I decided that's what I'm going to do. Like I discovered what developer relations was and got a job at ThirdWeb, which is a developer tools company to help people make Web3 applications. And my role there was developer relations, so writing the documentation, making videos, explaining things, just helping out the developer community be successful with those products. And then about a year ago, I joined Polygon Labs to do the same thing. So help people be successful building products or projects or just hacking on Polygon. And I guess more generally now with this Polygon 2.0, like you said, there's a lot going on, right? And the community is curious about how this works under the hood, what this really means for them, and especially from a developer perspective, like what's the kind of technological pros and cons, how does this really work, and how can I actually capitalize on this to build something that's interesting to me. So yeah, I guess TLDR, like one sentence, is pretty much just help people build and understand Polygon.
Yeah. I wanted to congratulate you about like your very high quality videos you've been publishing on YouTube. So for those who don't know, Jarrod is publishing videos on YouTube explaining like how like basically Polygon works. But also I've seen that you've been publishing videos about EigenLayer and other topics. So I think that might be very useful and relevant for the people watching us. So don't hesitate to check this out.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for saying that.
So basically, like, what's going on at Polygon? Like, you've been, I guess, working on Polygon 2.0. Like, what is Polygon 2.0? What makes sense? Like, why did Polygon went this way? And how do you compare the solution you're developing versus, like, I don't know, like other stacks available?
Yeah. So the way that I like to kind of frame when people ask this question is like almost like a before and after of what Polygon and MATIC originally was kind of created for, and the reasoning behind that to how the space has progressed over time to lead us to kind of where we are today. So most people think of Polygon and think of the Polygon chain, right? Which is our like bread and butter, our proof of stake chain that has had some of those huge collaborations with the biggest companies in the world, like creating these Web3 experiences on the proof of stake chain. And really, the mission with that chain was to say people like to use Ethereum. Ethereum has a lot of strong points in terms of decentralization and security, but it's too expensive for people to use, and it's too slow for people to use in about 99% of use cases, right? So it's too expensive and too slow. And the Polygon proof of stake chain kind of said, okay, there's also, at the time, there was also like the environmental impact of the proof of work consensus mechanism. So a combination of things kind of led to this innovation of Polygon proof of stake chain, which at the time was essentially to say, you can use exactly the same tools on Ethereum, you can build with the same smart contract languages, and all of the developer experience and the user experience is going to be the same based on the EVM. We're just going to kind of say, hey, let's use this proof of stake model. We'll also kind of use this delegated proof of stake to make it even more scalable and really focus on the scalability aspect instead of emphasizing the other two pillars as heavily. So you kind of get a nice balance of decentralization, security, and then a huge increase in scalability. So then that was really where it was when it was created. And then over time, as some of you, I'm sure, listening will already know, Polygon now has more than one chain and multiple different products to kind of supplement the proof of stake chain, which is still running today. So what it is today is we have our own zkEVM, which is the zero knowledge rollup layer 2 built on Ethereum. So the difference there is where right now Polygon proof of stake is essentially what a lot of people consider a side chain or a commit chain. It's the zkEVM is built on top of Ethereum, where it posts all of the transaction data back down to Ethereum and inherits a lot of the security properties through that whole data being posted back to Ethereum, or soon to be blobs, I guess I should say. And then following the zkEVM, I guess the kind of logic was to say, well, we built this thing and it's all open source. Like you can see all of the implementation details. We're kind of innovating this thing in public. Why don't we make another tool to kind of supplement this to say, well, other people also want their own dedicated block space. They also want to have customized rules in their own chains, or to just launch a chain to support their business or whatever needs they have to create their own chain. Why don't we make it a process that you can actually kind of take the zkEVM, make any customizations to any aspect of it, like the prover, the data availability layer, whatever you want to change. And we built the chain development kit, or the CDK, which is kind of what we're focusing on now, is to say, we built the zkEVM, why don't we just make all of it open source and kind of package it together in a customizable modular way so that other people can launch their own chains. And we've seen that with projects like OKX or A-Star, and a lot of other different projects, to say, okay, well, they essentially we have the zkEVM, they've changed some aspects to it and launched their own L2 that is almost a fork or some variation of the zkEVM. And a lot of different L2s are kind of spinning up with this CDK. I know I've kind of rambled a lot to kind of give you the history, but the final piece of that is the AggLayer, which is kind of tying all of these L2s that are launching not only with the CDK, but in the broader ecosystem, and kind of tying them together in a way where you can access the different users across different chains, access the different liquidity across different chains, and making, rather than having a lot of individual L2s, making a kind of more unified experience to say, hey, like, well, we're all really doing the same thing at the end of the day. We're building decentralized experiences. It makes sense for us to be able to access and tap into the different communities and the different liquidity across these L2s.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est LA solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
Great. So if I had to sum up, so basically Polygon went to like a side chain, which was based on proof of stake, then created its own zkEVM, like basically an L2 on Ethereum, then built the CDK, which helps like anyone to create its own zkEVM chain, or layer 2 at least, and customize everything so that it can like build their own one and basically define the parameters they're interested in. And then basically you invented the AggLayer, which is like a layer that helps like any chain using the Polygon CDK to tap in the liquidity of like the Polygon ecosystem. So personally, that is like the biggest part and in the part I'm the most excited about, because basically you could have like 10 layer 2s, but having the same shared liquidity. So you don't have to like bring people and make sure there is enough liquidity so you could like, I don't know, trade, exchange, swap, or whatever. You could just like enjoy it and basically use the liquidity from like any layer 2 of the Polygon ecosystem because you're tapping the AggLayer. But like, is the AggLayer live already? And if not, like when? If yes, like what are the insights so far?
Yeah. So the summary there, you nailed it. So I'm glad at least my rambling was correct. But one small correction I will make is kind of the vision of the AggLayer is not just specific to Polygon CDK chains. So kind of treating it as like a public good almost, that obviously Polygon's team is kind of the main contributor towards, but there'll also be, or there also are and will be more contributors to this kind of open source public good that anyone can kind of permissionlessly tap into. So if I wanted to launch an optimistic L2 in the future, we're kind of saying, well, you know, if you want to access all of the people who have also opted into the AggLayer and access their liquidity and access their communities, you'll be able to kind of permissionlessly tap into that without, you know, having to contact Polygon directly and say, hey, how do I get involved in this? So yeah, it's not just well, the idea is it's not just going to be limited to Polygon CDK chains. So to answer the question, is the AggLayer live? The answer is yes. The AggLayer is live in its first iteration. So the release of the AggLayer is going to come in multiple different phases, and each phase is obviously going to be better than the last and kind of have more features than the previous version. I think we have 2 or 3, at least at the time we're recording this, of the Polygon CDK chains opted into the AggLayer. I think 2 are public and 1 I don't think I can say right now. But
I'm trying to get some alpha. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, so essentially the plan is we'll have obviously our Polygon chain. So we have the Polygon zkEVM is going to opt into the AggLayer. And I think that's going to be a big push for some of initially the Polygon CDK chains, and then later on will be a kind of incentive to opt in for other different chains outside of that community, because I think there's 100 or 150 mil TVL on the Polygon zkEVM and obviously a bunch of users. And then later on down the line, when the proof of stake chain also converts to a ZK powered layer 2, that's going to have a huge incentive for others to kind of say, hey, I want to tap into all of those Polygon users and access that liquidity. So those are going to be two. Then we'll have, I think the two that I've already mentioned in the Polygon CDK community right now is A*, and I believe OKX is going to opt into the AggLayer as well. So those will be the first two publicly announced. So there's maybe some alpha in there. And then, yeah, like you said, the plan is to have essentially anyone who wants to access the interoperability between these chains will be able to opt into the AggLayer. And then more broadly, this will spread out into the different ecosystems outside of the Polygon CDK community as well.
So the AggLayer is not like enabled by default for like the Polygon like CDK chains, I would say, or layer 2s. Like you have to, I don't know, like define a parameter and say yes, or like do you have like some like more complexity and other things to set up to make it happen?
Yeah, so I believe the default is not to opt into the AggLayer if you're just spinning up like a CDK chain. So like, for example, I've been playing around like launching some test nets and things like that with the CDK, and it's not sending the proofs back to the AggLayer. So the default behavior is just sending it straight to Ethereum. And then the way that the mental model that I kind of have is to say, you're just switching like one thing or one component or one aspect of the L2 that you're creating when you opt into the AggLayer, right? So instead of sending the proofs directly to Ethereum, the mental model that I have is you're kind of sending it to this middle layer in between, which is the AggLayer, right? So instead of zkEVM, A*, OKX, whatever other L2s have opted into the AggLayer, all kind of individually sending them back to Ethereum. The goal, which is not the first iteration of the AggLayer right now, will be a future iteration, is to say all of these L2s will send them to this middle layer. They'll be aggregated into a single proof, which is kind of, I guess, where the name comes from, and then sent to Ethereum directly. So it'll kind of like combine all of the different chains that have opted in into one single proof that then is getting sent to Ethereum. So in my mind, the answer is no, it's not the default behavior currently, but to do it is just kind of swapping the behavior of one component of the chain that you're creating.
And so what is interesting is that you keep the native assets between like all those layer 2s, like opting for the AggLayer. So basically you always have like the native assets, not about like wrapping the assets or whatever, right?
Sorry, would you be able to clarify the question for me? Sorry.
So whenever like you like enjoy the liquidity of like the AggLayer, like on Polygon CDK chains or other ones, so you benefit from like you keep the native assets whenever you use this liquidity. It's not about like wrapping tokens or whatever. Like it's always like native tokens, right?
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting question because
or maybe I'm confused about it, and I don't know.
Yeah. I think I get what you're saying. So maybe I can talk about it. So
Yeah.
essentially, like, it is interesting because each L2 can have its own native token. It doesn't have to be ETH. So the process then is kind of like, well, do you have some middleman kind of deciding the value of the two tokens if you want to do a swap? And then I guess it does get a little complex between two chains that don't share the same native token. But from my understanding, like, the current implementation is essentially to say, well, I can combine this bridge and call function into a single interaction, essentially. So, for example, if I wanted to interact with a smart contract on a different chain that is opted into the AggLayer, I can currently call this like bridge and call function to say, okay, well, I guess the name is kind of self-explanatory. I want a bridge and then call this function on a different smart contract, and you're paying the fee upfront to perform both of those operations. And then the kind of later iterations, the model that I have in my head is to say, okay, the multiple different transactions that I want to occur on chain A or chain B or chain C, etc., I create a bundle, and these are called like atomic transactions. Atomic meaning I want either all of them to succeed or I want none of them to succeed. And the example that I use in one of my videos is, for example, like cross-chain swapping or cross-chain arbitrage, or swapping of tokens across different chains. Obviously, you really want all of these to succeed, or if half of them succeed, something's gone seriously wrong, right? Because you can't have like a buy transaction go through on one chain and then a sell transaction not go through, and you just end up with this really awkward situation, or the reverse, where the buy doesn't go through but the sell does go through, and you've just kind of printed money out of thin air. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, like to access the liquidity, it depends on like the situation or the exact thing that you're trying to do, but yeah, the current implementation is that you're able to just simply call smart contract functions across different chains that have opted in.
If you had to compare the AggLayer to other solutions available on the market, like what would be those solutions? Like to which like projects, protocols, like solution is the AggLayer comparing to?
Yeah, so I think the one that comes to mind is shared sequences. So shared sequencer like Espresso, for example. And the comparison here is essentially they're trying to achieve the same thing, which is interoperability between chains. And maybe I'll just give like a brief explanation of sequences to some of the listeners who are not as in the depths of like how L2s work, I guess. But a sequencer is essentially like the most important part of your L2 chain. It's how you process all of the transactions back to the L1. It's also, if your sequencer goes down, your chain is essentially not working. So it can't process transactions and it can't send data back to wherever you're sending data back to, most commonly Ethereum. So if the sequencer goes down, you're in a lot of trouble. The shared sequencer system is basically saying, well, currently Optimism has their own sequencer, Polygon zkEVM has their own sequencer, Arbitrum has their own sequencer. Every single L2 has their own individual sequencer that doesn't communicate with each other, despite a lot of them often just doing the exact same thing across different L2s. So something like Espresso is saying, what if each of these different chains opted in to use the same sequencer? And then as part of that, you could then kind of have this central meeting point of all of these transactions and achieve this interoperability between the chains that are using the same sequencer. So for example, you could do the stuff that I was talking about before, where you could have cross-chain swaps, where let's say I send a transaction from Optimism, I send a transaction from Arbitrum. They both go to the same shared sequencer, and that shared sequencer kind of is able to handle, since it has visibility from both of these chains and is ultimately responsible for executing them and sending them back to Ethereum as well, it can therefore facilitate these cross-chain interactions. So I think that's the most comparable. The difference between a shared sequencing system and the AggLayer, in my mind, is what we're calling sovereignty. So sovereignty was kind of a confusing word to me, to be honest, but what it means is, as Polygon, for example, we really care about the experience that users have, and we want to make sure the sequencer is kind of a top quality. And every other chain has that same feeling, right? It's like we want, at least currently, I think every single L2 has a centralized sequencer, except maybe there are some exceptions to that I'm not aware of. But most L2s, they really care about having control of the sequencer. And control is a scary word to use, but essentially what I mean by that is, if the sequencer is not working to the standard that you expect, your chain is not operating to the standard that you expect. And if there's downtime, or if there's performance optimizations that you want to make, or in some like business perspectives, if there's some profit that you want to take from the sequencer fees, then with a shared sequencer, you can't really do that because you're having to hand over control of your sequencer to another party, essentially, right? For example, Espresso, you would say, okay, I'm not going to run my own sequencer. I'm going to opt in to use this shared sequencer that Espresso is running. And within that process, you're essentially saying, okay, I'm going to hand over the performance, the control's a weird word to use in Web3, but I think it kind of makes sense in this context. I'm going to hand all of that over to another system that I can't really improve. I don't have as much visibility. I don't have as much control over. I'm not able to customize any of the behaviors of that thing. So essentially, it's like you're giving away a lot of the control that a chain has by opting into a shared sequencer. So AggLayer, it's trying to solve the same problems where you have interoperability between L2 chains, and you can do these things like cross-chain transactions, but you still run your own sequencer. Each chain still has their own sequencer. It's just sending these proofs to a different place other than Ethereum. So from like a business perspective and from I guess a lot of different perspectives, it's like beneficial for you to have the sequencer in your hands, and then you still get the benefits of the interoperability.
So like, does Arbitrum or Optimism could use like the AggLayer, or like it doesn't make any sense, or is it not possible?
Yeah, so my understanding is yes, in the future, like anyone will be able to permissionlessly opt in to use the AggLayer. I don't think it's right, like there right now that anyone can come in and say, I'm just going to flick the switch and swap into the AggLayer currently. And then I guess like later down the track, does the OP collective like want to opt into the AggLayer? We'll see how that plays out. But the vision is like, yeah, anyone will be able to come in with their L2 and say, yes, I want to access these interoperability benefits, therefore I'm going to opt into the AggLayer. I don't think it's there like that freely at the current iteration, but that is the goal.
But like, does Arbitrum like in Optimism are trying to do the same with Arbitrum and OP Stack, or like it's not the case at all? Like I'm trying to map like what are the solutions like that are quite similar to it, because like this is quite very new to me, and this is like I would say a new narrative in a way. I mean, interoperability has been like a word that has been used like for a very long time, but now it does feels like more real in a way. So yeah, could you maybe explain a bit like if other like big L2s are having the same approach with their CDK or stack solution?
Yeah, I think they are. So I think and L1s as well, like for example, Avalanche or AVAX. I'm not going to pretend like I know as much as I do about as Polygon with these chains, but I know they are working on similar products. So for example, like Optimism has a super chain, which I believe is essentially trying to or will be trying to achieve a lot of the same goals, where okay, we have like we have I'm blanking on the name. Sorry, we have Base, we have Zora, like we have a couple of different optimistic L2s, and obviously like the same problems exist in that space where okay, well we have all of these L2s, like but none of them can communicate with each other. So yeah, I don't know the exact details of like what it looks like technically, but I do imagine that the kind of the different spaces like the optimistic L2s of the world will kind of, at least if they aren't already, will start to work on these same solutions. The one I am a little familiar with is, like I said, the AVAX ecosystem, where you can kind of do the same thing across subnets, where it's almost the same concept, right? Where you have, okay, you can launch an L1 subnet with this kind of similar create your own chain system that Polygon CDK is. And then you can do these kind of cross-chain transactions within these different subnets. I don't know the technical details of how it works. I'm just saying like there are, I guess, comparable things across the broader ecosystem as well. It's not, I guess, the details of how it works and the benefits and the pros and cons of using zero knowledge proofs to actually achieve this and make it quick enough to be viable. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with zero knowledge proofs. I think it is probably going to be a bit of an edge across the different competitors, I would say.
Yeah, I think they will move to like a zk solution very soon. I think the optimistic like approach is something that was kind of like a short-term solution to make it possible, but at the end of the day, like everyone is saying that zk is way better. So I do believe that it makes sense.
Avant de poursuivre cette vidéo, je t'invite tout simplement à rejoindre mon Discord dans lequel tu peux retrouver plus de 10 000 traders actifs. Dans ce Discord, on parle de nombreuses choses, notamment on va tout simplement partager nos analyses, nos graphiques, sur quoi on spécule, les différents airdrops qu'on farm, les news en temps réel qui sont partagées par exemple sur Twitter ou sur différents sites. Enfin bref, c'est vraiment un moyen d'être à jour sur ce qui se passe dans l'écosystème. Et en plus de ça, sur ce Discord-là, je vais partager tout simplement pas mal de données et pas mal de choses que je surveille personnellement, donc des données qui sont importantes à mes yeux et tout simplement moi personnellement ce que je surveille au quotidien. Donc ça permet vraiment d'avoir un suivi en temps réel de moi, ce que je regarde et comment je me positionne dans l'écosystème. D'ailleurs, tu peux retrouver mes performances de 2022 et 2023 sur tous les trades que j'ai partagés gratuitement et publiquement. Donc ici, tu as absolument tout le détail avec les positions disponibles de manière transparente, mes positions actives, mon folio, ainsi que tous les trades que personnellement je prends de mon côté avec le suivi de comment je déplace mon stop loss, comment j'ajuste mon risque, comment je me positionne, etc. J'espère que ça vous plaira. Tout est gratuit. Je vous invite à rejoindre. Tout sera en description, en commentaire épinglé. Et maintenant, place à la vidéo.
I wanted to have like your opinion about like the success and the traction like Polygon's zkEVM had. So basically, it's, I would say, less used and has like less TVL than its competitors. How do you explain this? Like, is it because of like you provide like less incentives, or because it's, I would say, harder to onboard like some developer or projects? Like, what's behind the scene on this side, and like how do you get like a well-used L2?
Yeah, I think like I don't have all the answers to like how to launch a successful L2. And yeah, I think like my non-Polygon off the record opinion maybe is like obviously the new like flashy L2s, the expectation and the speculation that a lot of people have in this meta is like, well, these L2s don't have a token, so we're going to get an airdrop if we kind of farm interactions on these L2s. I think that's maybe an unspoken truth of a lot of the TVL of different L2s. Not to say like all the activities fake or dismiss any of the success that like zk sync or scroll or yeah, I do think it helps. Obviously, like I don't think that's controversial to say. I think Sandeep and the founders have done interviews on this to say like why is the TVL not as high as the competitor L2s in the zk space. So I think they probably have better answers than I do, but it's interesting like the perspective of the community and the perspective of builders as well is like the fees are higher on Polygon zkEVM than to Mystic rollups right now, and I think maybe the education might not be there of like the risks associated with having lower fees, or the understanding is not there, or maybe people just are willing to make that sacrifice to access a higher TVL or higher liquidity on those chains. So yeah, I don't have like a solid answer on why it's lower, but it's interesting.
Is it because like you're not like fully using the capacity of like the new Ethereum upgrade, or like how do you explain why the fees are, I would say, higher than your competitors so far? I think it's related, right?
Yeah. So I think in general, like right now, zk rollups are more expensive than optimistic rollups just because of the kind of computation that needs to happen. But across different zk L2s, the blob, the 4844 implementation has gone through on a couple different zkEVMs. So I think it's live on Linear. I think it's live on zk Sync Era.
Starknet.
Yeah, Starknet. Thank you. and maybe a couple of others. But our
Yeah.
implementation is coming in May, so like 2 weeks. So I think that's going to have a pretty drastic reduction in gas fees as well. So yeah, across different zkL2s, I don't think it's going to be much different. But yeah, like I said, in general, like it's kind of a trade-off of optimistic rollups are cheaper, but you're getting less security. And then, yeah, right now, zk rollups are more expensive in comparison to OP rollups. But once that 4844 implementation comes on, I believe the 1st of May to the zkEVM, I don't see there's going to be much difference across the zkEVMs.
I think we haven't mentioned Polygon Miden. What is it? I mean, I haven't been like searching a lot about it. I think one of my business partners he was like mentioning it like on a call of streams, but I guess I've been distracted and didn't learn everything about it. So maybe could you give us like a quick recap? And yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert on Miden by any means, but I can give you like my TLDR. One of our other DevRels in our team is like our resident Miden expert, so he'll know more than me. But the kind of one sentence pitch, I guess, for Miden is it's a zero knowledge system, but the difference is it's going to be client side proving instead of the proving occurring in this kind of system that we have today, where it goes from the
it's
aggregator
for non-EVM, right?
Yeah, so it's going to be non-EVM, like you said, and then the language that we use, which you can build on Miden, is going to be Rust, which is pretty exciting. So for those of you who don't know, Rust is kind of what you use to build on Solana right now. So it's going to be, it's pretty exciting. Like I said, I'm not an expert by any means, but a couple different technologies like client-side proving, and yeah, like you said, non-EVM. It's essentially saying, what can we do if we're not bound by the limitations of the EVM, and using zero knowledge proofs in an environment that they're actually like built to be in. It's like optimized to be in, right? Where the EVM was never intended to be in the zero knowledge proof space. So you kind of had to like jam zk proofs and make it work, and that kind of shows in like the different types of zkEVMs of type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and the different implementations and approaches and opinions that people have. But Miden is kind of like, what if we just said, no, we're not going to down the path of the EVM. We're going to kind of make this environment where it is optimized for zero knowledge proofs, and you're not confined to the rules and the limitations that are associated with the EVM when you're building these decentralized programs. So it is going to be more niche, I would say. Like, it's not a generalized EVM chain that you can just say, okay, let me swap my contracts over from Ethereum and deploy them on this chain. It is going to be like really high performance for a more niche, more hardcore developer audience, I would say, where you're really building high performance applications that you need that environment for.
So is it about like building on top of like other ecosystems, like basically doing the same as like the Polygon CDK and zkEVM approach, which is like based on Ethereum, but like for example on Solana, on other chains, or so basically L2s on other chains, or not really?
No, it's just going to be its own standalone chain. So you can just kind of think of it as like a L1. Or
so yeah, another L1 basically. Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong on that. Like I said, I'm not an expert or like how it works under the hood, but that's my mental model. Is like, this is like a standalone chain starting from scratch. Like, this is built from the ground up for a performance environment.
I wanted to talk about the token, not about the price, but about like the transition from the MATIC token to the POL token. I think it was mentioned like a long time ago you wanted to make this transition. I think it hasn't been live yet. So why so? And like, what's the use case and interest in like converting MATIC to POL?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it was like mid to late last year that we announced we're going to do this migration from MATIC to POL, POL. and essentially the reason for that is what I was touching on earlier in the interview, where we initially had one chain, we now have multiple chains, and the one token is kind of bound to that initial proof of stake chain. So to answer your question, it is like technically live, like you can swap and migrate from MATIC to POL, but there's no real reason to do so. So there's no point doing it at this current moment in time. Maybe it depends when you're watching in the future, but the POL token is deployed, right? The contracts are live. The reason I say there's no point in migrating right now is the native gas fee for the proof of stake chain is still MATIC. It's not the migrated token. So once essentially the jump from, okay, we're using MATIC as a gas fee for proof of stake, jumps from MATIC to POL, then that's the time where it's going to make sense to say, okay, let's stop migrating from MATIC to POL. I think the general advice that we're giving to people right now is to say, just don't perform any action. I think we're going to sort of see how it plays out I don't know the full details of how this is going to play out, but maybe we automatically stop migrating tokens for people or what the migration process is. So yeah, I don't know the full details of how that will actually play out when that migration does happen. But yeah,
so the question is when?
When? Yeah, I don't know the answer. is the truth of like when that exact migration is going to happen. But yeah, I can speak to like the reasoning of why the POL token is being released or anything like that. But yeah, specific dates, you probably have to ask like one of the founders of who's a bit more knowledgeable than me.
I just wanted to know also about the token, like how will the POL token capture the value that is created in the Polygon ecosystem and through, I don't know, the AggLayer, the layer 2s that are built with the Polygon CDKs and everything. Like, so yeah, what are the utilities of the POL token? How do you capture value from it? And yeah, maybe can you explain like the staking layer, because I think it is very linked and that is pretty new. I mean, is it like kind of free staking? Because like you're staking multiple chains with one token, but
yeah, in my mind,
not with your ETH that are staked. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. It is like a similar concept, I would say. So, like you said, we are coming out with this staking layer. I think we're calling it Staking Hub. Or I think the name maybe even like TBD, but yeah, the Staking Hub is like what I've been calling it. So it is like a similar concept, I would say, where you, instead of like, if you've ever staked MATIC today, like you just go in, you stake MATIC, and you serve one specific role in one specific chain, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to add security to the proof of stake network. We're now, like you said, we've come out with the CDK, we have our zkEVM, we have proof of stake chain, we have all of these different chains that do kind of require this decentralization and this security, right? So what the kind of goal of the staking hub is going to be is to say you'll be able to use this POL token as a way of providing multiple different roles for multiple different chains. So you'll be able to come in and, in my mind, you can kind of say, well, I want to perform this role for chain A, B, and C, and I want to perform this role for chain C, D, and E. And you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do and what chains you want to serve in those roles. So, for example, let's say you wanted to do like traditional validating for chain X, Y, and Z, or you might want to do, like in the future, you might want to run the prover software, or you might want to, if the sequencer becomes decentralized, you might want to be part of that, or you might want to be a part of the data availability community for the chains running as Validium. So the vision is kind of to say, well, we need all of these aspects at some point in time. These are likely going to be decentralized. We need people to participate in that. And it's kind of the same logic of why would you participate in any activities in other chains, you are kind of expecting rewards for doing those roles. So it is, at least in my mind, it's kind of similar to restaking, where it's like, well, I have my ETH that's staked, and then I'm gonna stick it and support other networks in other different roles. So you can kind of use the I guess in the restaking world, you're using the same token to support multiple networks. In that sense, it is the plan is to be similar, to say, okay, well, I have this, I can use it to participate in multiple networks in multiple different ways. So in that sense, I guess it is similar to restaking.
Okay. Pretty clear to me. I just wanted to finish maybe this interview with like 2 or 3 more questions. One is highly related to the future of like Polygon. So what is a roadmap about? Like what's coming in? Like what will happen like the next few months for Polygon? Like, and what are you excited about when it comes to Polygon?
Yeah, so our roadmap is like, our kind of key push right now is on the zkEVM, the CDK, and the AggLayer. So in terms of the zkEVM, the most immediate improvement that we'll have is like the 4844 blobs. So I think we're expecting like a 2 to 5x reduction in gas fees on the zkEVM over the next like couple of weeks or a couple of months. So that's going to be awesome. And then in terms of, I think the most exciting thing for me is the improvements to the AggLayer. So we're going to be starting to onboard more of these chains to the AggLayer. And then the future iterations of this AggLayer that are going to come out are very exciting for me as well. So we'll have support for these atomic transactions where you can say, I want transaction A to go on chain 1, I want transaction B to go on chain 2, and execute those atomic transactions and make sure either all of them go through or none of them go through. And then the kind of iteration on top of that is to actually use these optimistic confirmations where you can facilitate that and not be restricted by the time it takes to generate and verify these zero knowledge proofs. So what that means is you'll be able to say, okay, I want transaction 1 to go on chain A, I want transaction 2 to go on chain B. And if both of these are opted into the AggLayer, they're going to kind of say, okay, let's kind of optimistically say these are going to go through, and that like bundle of transactions is going to occur in like a couple of seconds, because if we're both agreeing that these are going to optimistically go through, then we can facilitate that across chains in like a couple of seconds, which is going to be incredible. I think that's a little down, probably down the track and not a couple of months, but I think that's the most exciting thing for me, is like almost like a combination of zk and optimistic confirmations, where you kind of combine the best of both worlds to achieve these like insane levels of interoperability between the L2s. And yeah, I think the thing that I'm working on that I'm most excited about is like just making the CDK easier for people to hack on and build on. Like we have all of these components open source. What I'm working on is just to say, how can I make this as easy as possible for people to actually build on and get started, like shipping your own chain and shipping these innovations. So that's kind of what I'm working on, that I'm like most passionate about. But yeah, more broadly for Polygon is the zkEVM, the CDK, and the AggLayer.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est LA solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
Okay. And outside of the Polygon ecosystem, like, what are you excited about? I don't know, like, is it about like Ethereum, about Bitcoin, about some dApps? Like, what are you looking at, Jarrod?
Yeah, so I think the coolest thing right now for me outside of Polygon is probably EigenLayer. I'm sure that answer doesn't surprise a lot of people. Yeah, like
I mean,
I said,
there is so many things. So, like, there is so many things to check. So, like, I think EigenLayer could have been like an answer, but there are so many things that, like, I mean, I'm not very well, I would say, documented on like an EigenLayer. Like, I reached out to the company to get an interview. So, I mean, for like a video interview and everything. I think that makes sense. But I think people are very scared of like the risks behind. So I think some of the documentations and everything does answer as like part of that. But yeah, I can understand the feelings. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no problem. Like, yeah, I think there are like obviously risks associated to it, but I think it's like you said, it's kind of like a similar idea where, okay, I can now use this money that I have put in Ethereum. I don't have to pull it out to actually participate in other networks. So I think the reason that it's exciting for me is because we kind of have like a lot of like the maxis of Ethereum are obviously staking in Ethereum, and then with that, it almost limits people's participation in new innovations that, from a creator perspective or like a founder perspective, it's like, well, how do I get these people interested? How do I get these people involved? And how do I get them to participate in this thing that I'm creating? That's a challenge for new teams to actually help kind of bootstrap and decentralize these networks or whatever they're creating. And I think EigenLayer has like nailed the best of both worlds, where it's kind of like, well, you could still be an ETH maxi, but you could also kind of come over here and play around and learn and participate in new networks and applications. So I think that's why it's cool for me. Obviously, there's like a degen aspect to it where you can like pump your money into LRTs and LSTs or whatever. I'm not very well versed in that side of things, but yeah, exactly. So it's also exciting for that kind of that side of things where, you know, people are getting excited and trying out new things, trying to make some money. So it's kind of got everyone excited about it, which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, like I've been chatting with like one of the biggest like staking companies, which name is Quel, and basically they told me like the APR is going so down that like at a point in time, like people will not be super interested in staking, at least on ETH. Like, I mean, if you have like 1% APR on ETH, I mean, still 1%, we'll take it, but that's not that big a deal. So maybe you would like to do some other stuff with your ETH. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like take your 3% ETH or 1%. 1% returns and do something fun with it, you know. Obviously that has risks associated to it, like you said, but I'm sure that will become like more clear as it gets like more attention over time as well.
Thank you very much for your time, Jarrod. Maybe any last words or thoughts to share with the audience and the people who watched the entire video?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been really fun. So I want to say thank you, of course, for inviting me and listening to me yap away for an hour. So thank you. And yeah, I guess like if you are interested in learning more in detail about Polygon, like how the zkEVM works, how the CDK works, how the AggLayer works, anything from like a technical perspective, I do have in-depth like hour-long videos going into I try to be as like unbiased as possible and address people's concerns that they have about these things as well in those videos to really just explain, okay, here's how it is, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's how it works. And so if you want to go like even deeper than what we've discussed on this, like check out those videos. They should be pretty easy to find if you just search for like Polygon CDK or Polygon zkEVM or anything. So yeah, if you are interested in like going super deep, yeah, check out those videos as well.
Thank you for your time, Jarrod. Have a very good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. See you later.